Rio loved browsing social media during her breaks. The endless scroll of curated photos, memes, and videos felt like a relaxing escape from her routine as a graphic designer. She considered herself a skeptic, the kind of person who didn't fall for clickbait or internet challenges. That's why when she came across a viral post about an optical illusion that promised to reveal something strange, she scoffed. The post showed an intricate black and white spiral with the caption, "Stare at this for 30 seconds and tell us what you see. But beware. Once you see it, you can't unsee it." Curious, Rio stared at the spiral. At first, it was just a mesmerizing swirl, but as she focused, she thought she saw something flicker, a shadowy figure. She blinked, laughed it off, and moved on. It was just an optical illusion, after all. That evening, as Rio left her office, she felt an unusual heaviness in the air. The sidewalk stretched long and dimly lit, lined by sparse streetlights and encroaching shadows from nearby buildings. She shrugged off the unease, telling herself she was tired. As she neared the side road passage she took every night, something caught her eye. Across the street, in the dim light, a tall, pitch-black figure stood motionless. Its form was devoid of detail, like a human silhouette cut out of reality. But the most unsettling thing was its eyes, pinpricks of white light that seemed to pierce through her. Rio's heart quickened. She rationalized that it was a trick of the light or her imagination playing games after a long day. She kept walking, determined not to look back. The figure didn't follow, or so she thought. The next day, Rio tried to laugh about it with her co-worker Jenna. "I think I'm working too hard," she joked. "I thought I saw a shadow person or something on my way home." Jenna raised an eyebrow. "Shadow person? That's creepy. You've been watching too many horror movies." Rio chuckled, but couldn't shake the unease. That evening, as she walked home, she glanced toward the side road passage. The figure was there again, closer this time. It stood near the curb, its unblinking eyes following her as she passed. Her stomach churned, but she quickened her pace, refusing to let fear take over. Over the next few days, the sightings became more frequent. The figure appeared in various places along her route, each time closer than before. On the fifth night, it stood directly in her path. Rio froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, she thought she could hear something, a faint, low hum, like a distant whisper. She stepped to the side and hurried past, her heart hammering in her chest. By now, Rio was certain this was no coincidence. She tried to avoid the side road passage, taking alternate routes home, but it didn't matter. The figure appeared no matter where she went, always in her peripheral vision, always closer. The oppressive feeling of being watched grew unbearable. One night, as she rounded a corner, she realized with a sinking dread that the figure wasn't there. The absence was somehow more terrifying. She walked faster, her senses on high alert. When she dared to glance over her shoulder, she gasped. The figure was right behind her, inches away. Its eyes bore into hers, and before she could scream, everything went black. When Rio woke, she was disoriented. She wasn't in her bed or even on the sidewalk. She was standing in the side road passage. But something was wrong. The world felt inverted, the shadows were too deep, the air too still. As she tried to orient herself, she noticed movement on the opposite sidewalk. It was her. She saw herself walking down the street, headphones in, head tilted slightly in thought, exactly as she'd been moments before she passed out. Her other self paused, sensing something, and turned to look directly at her. Their eyes met, and Rio's blood ran cold. Her other self recoiled. The look of fear and horror on her own face was unmistakable. What is this?" Rio whispered, her voice trembling. She tried to step forward, but her body wouldn't move. She felt anchored to the spot where the black figure had always stood. It hit her then. She was the figure. She tried to scream, to call out to her other self, but no sound came. Her perspective shifted, her vision narrowing until all she could see were the glowing eyes, her eyes reflected in the terror-stricken face of the person she once was. Days passed, or perhaps years. Time had no meaning in this state. Rio watched as her other self went about life, increasingly haunted by the sightings. She saw herself looking over her shoulder, losing sleep, trying to confide in friends who dismissed her fears. And every night, Rio stood in the shadows, unable to move, unable to warn her past self of the fate that awaited her. The cycle continued, an endless loop of fear and inevitability. Rio realized the truth. The optical illusion had been more than a trick. It was a doorway, a trap, and now she was part of it. On the first night of her entrapment, Rio fought to understand what had happened. Her mind raced as she replayed every moment. The optical illusion, it had to be the catalyst. But why? Was it a curse, some twisted experiment? There were no answers, only the growing dread of eternity in this void. Hours stretched into days, and Rio's thoughts became fragmented. She couldn't interact with the world, but she could observe. She watched her other self, the real Rio, struggle to maintain normalcy. Her past self's bright eyes were dimmed by exhaustion, her laughter strained. The world began to mirror her descent, colors fading, shadows lengthening. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, like distant voices carried on the wind. But as the days passed, they grew louder, more distinct. Words formed, cruel and mocking. "You're nothing, you belong here. It's your fault." Rio's sanity unraveled further. She screamed into the void, clawed at her invisible prison, begged for mercy. No one answered. Meanwhile, the real Rio became obsessed with the figure. She searched for explanations, online forums, paranormal podcasts, anything that could offer a clue. One night, she stumbled across a thread about the optical illusion. The comments chilled her, saw the figure after staring at it. "It's always there now," one user wrote. "It's like it's alive. Gets closer every day," said another. And then the final comment. "If you see its eyes up close, it's already too late." Rio slammed her laptop shut. She tried to convince herself it was nonsense, but deep down, she knew better. Months passed in the void. Rio's perception of time warped. Her existence was a blur of fear and longing. Then, one night, a change. Her real self stared at the spiral on her phone, just as she once had, and as her past self passed the side road passage, she froze, her gaze locking onto the figure standing in the shadows. Rio's heart sank as she realized what would happen next. Her other self quickened her pace, refusing to look back. But no matter how far she ran, the figure, Rio, would always be waiting. The loop continued, the terror perpetuated, and the spiral claimed its next victim, ensuring Rio's nightmare would never end. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like and subscribe. I will see you again next week.